Yes.
Mr. Evans, I want to return briefly to the question of the Mishcon letter and the January 2013 board meeting issue, and ask you about something you said in one of your statements. Shomit, could we have WITN 3859001, please? If we go to the second page, we go to the bottom of the page, paragraph 9. You refer there to the draft letter being tabled. And then if we pick it up in the last line, you say that there was no way, and then if we go to the top of the next page, please, DH would have agreed to the content, and I still suspect that the prime motive was to put me in an impossible position rather than having any realistic expectation of it leading to increased funding. What was the basis for your suspicion that the prime objective was not about interaction with the government about funding, but to put you personally into an impossible situation?
Well, from the time I was appointed as the chair, Russell and I had a strained relationship. Prior to that, we worked well together on a number of things, and for some reason the relationship changed, and I had received, sadly they're not available now with me anyway, some rather threatening, hostile, I don't mean threatening in a sort of illegal way, emails from him on my home account over a year or two, and on various issues. And I thought, and this was in a sense, sort of I saw it as possibly a sequel to that. And I think at best he was probably trying to embarrass me.
Right, well,
so he may have, I'm not questioning his commitment to wanting us to get more money, but I thought that was why the suggestion was making sure everybody signed the letter. We could have sent a letter without everybody signing it in a slightly different mode.
okay. Well,
But I don't know, I'm not sure, but that was my, as I think I said at the time, of my suspicion.
we can no doubt ask Mr. Mishcon about that as well next week.
Yeah.
The other matter arising from the material, we can take the statement down, thank you. The other matter arising from some of the material we looked at this morning, Mr. Evans, is this. It would appear from some of the documents that we've looked at that your understanding in terms of the bids that were being put into the Department of Health for funding was that your bid was in competition with the entire NHS budget. Is that correct? Is that what you thought at the time?
Yes, I mean, my understanding, which, in a sense, relates to what Sir Brian was asking me just before lunch, the way the Department of Health deals with funding is they get an allocation from the Treasury. They have a multitude of demands, needs, etc., and then they decide how to allocate the money. And crudely, they will, if their budget, say, I'm making up some numbers, I hope you don't mind me doing this, if say their budget's being reduced by 3% from the Treasury, then their first instinct is to reduce all the budgets of those who they're allocating money to by 3%. So, as I was saying earlier, in this particular time of austerity, the department got a budget allocation which was something like 2 or 3% less than previously, and that was what was happening with public service. So their first instinct was to pass that hit on to us as far as our allocation was concerned. So what we were striving to do, which one might call it damage limitation, is to make sure that our budget did not get reduced and we would get the same as we did before. That didn't mean I liked it, because I wanted to get as much money as possible, but it would be unrealistic to start arguing for huge increases when it wasn't possible. And at one of the meetings of the department, and I'm afraid, Ms. Richardson, I can't remember which one or quite when it was, when we had some hint of sympathy from Elsa White and Rowena G-Cock, someone came along from the finance directorate of the department, who clearly knew nothing about our particular area of work, and was very unhelpful in their approach. So it was a bit ominous at that stage, and I think that we did reasonably well as we could have in the circumstance. I mean, just to finish on that, I mean, £2 million or £3 million was a lot of money for us and the beneficiaries, but within the Department of Health's overall budget, it was peanuts, really. And in a way, that could have been helpful to us, but on the other hand, it could have been unhelpful.
Mr. Fitzgerald, when he gave evidence to the inquiry last week, told us that he had been led to understand that there were essentially two Department of Health pots of money, an NHS pot and a non-NHS pot. And he had been led to understand that the Macfarlane Trust's funding came out of the non-NHS pot and wasn't in direct competition with hospitals, health bodies, and so on. Was your understanding different from that?
No, I didn't know that. I have no doubt that I wouldn't question that Mr. Fitzgerald's correct on that one, but I don't think it, at least on the surface, changes from the position that however many pots there were, the pots would have been reduced, if I can put it that way. So no, he may well be right, but he clearly knew something which either I didn't know or I've forgotten.
Do you understand why some, at least amongst the beneficiary community, thought that the Macfarlane Trust was too close to the Department of Health?
Well, I think it's partly because of what I've been describing now and before lunch, and that is that my way of doing things, and not which I still think was the right one, was to have tough, quiet arguments with the Department of Health in their offices or our offices, not ones to be talking loudly in public gatherings. Now, I think the latter is what the beneficiary community would have been looking for us to do, and I still don't think it would have been the best, fruitful way of behaving. So I think that was part of it, and I think also some of the questions you were asking me this morning about relationship of trustees to the DH if they were appointed by them and so forth may have been another aspect of it. But I think they were expecting us to behave in a way where we were very strident.
Going back to your first statement on the issue of interactions with government, Shamik, can we have WITN 3859001 again and go to page 5 this time? If we just look at paragraph 21, the first sentence is reflects the evidence that you've given today, and then you refer to 2 meetings with 2 ministers of health. So this suggests that you've had one meeting you had and another you tried to get a meeting and didn't. Can you just help us with in terms of the meeting that you had, which Minister of Health that was with, and roughly when, in terms of calendar year, you think that was?
Well, in total, I had more than two might be helpful to you unless you don't want me to take
No,
what
no,
they all
please do
were.
tell us.
What I didn't have as well. I had a meeting in 2011 with Anne Milton, who was then the minister. I had a meeting in I think it was 2013 with Mike Penning, who was a minister for the disabled at the time, and I had a meeting probably 2015 with Jane Ellison, who was the Minister of Health. In 2012, through a mutual contact, I've been trying to meet up with Anna Soubry, who was the Health Minister, and through a mutual contact, she and I thought we'd arrange for Anne Soubry and I to meet, and then at the last minute she rebuffed me and passed me back to the civil servants who we've been dealing with anyway. So there was quite a lot of interaction in that way.
Leaving aside the meeting with Anna Soubry, which didn't take place, as you've explained, can you just help us with very broadly what the subject areas were for discussion with the three meetings that did take place? So, with the first meeting in 2011 with Ms. Milton, what can you recall? This is before you're a chair of the Macfarlane Trust. You're then, at that point, a trustee of the Macfarlane Trust and a founding trustee of the Caxton Foundation. Can you record anything about what the subject matter of the meeting was or its purpose?
Yes, I can. I mean, Peter Stevens and I met with her, and it was partly to talk about the Caxton Foundation and its inception and what it was going to do and such like. I can't remember the detail more than that, but at the same time, I took the opportunity to be able to lobby her on various issues with the Macfarlane Trust, the predominant one being funding. And incidentally, she did send me a very complimentary letter after that.
And then
with Mike Penning.
Sorry, just before we go on to Mike Penning, with that 2011 meeting, did it result, as far as you can recall, or as far as you know, in any change of position or development in terms of funding or anything else?
I can't remember, but the financial position was not so critical at that stage as it was later on. I cannot remember.
Okay. And then you're about to tell us about the 2013 meeting with Mike Penning.
Yes, Mike Penning was the Minister for the Disabled at the time, and previously I think he'd been the chair of the partnership group, but I'm not sure on that. And again, it was to lobby him about funding issues and also about the general situation with the needs of the Macfarlane beneficiaries looking ahead. We had a informal meeting in the Portcullis House in the sort of cafe area there.
And then the 2015 meeting with Jane Ellison. What was the purpose and nature of that meeting?
Again, it was several issues. One was about funding, and the other was about the longer term ways of supporting the beneficiary community.
And in relation,
I had another meeting which with Alistair Burt, which I should have mentioned to you, with Anne, with Jan Barlow was with me, which was really when things were getting controversial over current and future funding arrangements. We met him, I think, in Parliament.
Was the Alistair Burt meeting that Ms Barlow also participated in, was that part of the APPG process? The review of funding that was being...
No, I don't think so. One of the beneficiaries who's also given a witness statement was a constituent of Alistair Burt's, and very much to the beneficiary's credit, he'd got a working relationship with, amongst others, Alistair Burt, and I think as a result of that, Alistair Burt arranged to meet with us, partly because, as the witnesses' statements have said, there was dissatisfaction over the funding issues and the stance which we were taking, which you and I have just been talking about, and therefore Alistair Burt wanted to, or suggested we had a meeting, which was again in the Commons, I think.
And then the meeting with Jane Ellison that you described in 2015, is there anything in particular you can recall either about what was said by the minister in that meeting or anything you can recall about the impact of that meeting, Vinny?
No, I can't. I mean, if I can, a bit of a general response, but the meetings with the ministers were, at the time, appeared to be very productive and there was optimism about the future, but it didn't always work out that way in practice.
Now, I just have a handful of more general questions about funding issues before we look at the reserves issue specifically. In your statement, in your second statement, you've said that you weren't aware of the Department of Health approach to funding being based upon any calculation relating to beneficiaries and their needs, or any changes over time in the number of beneficiaries or their changing profile. It was a global approach. Here's X, or here's X plus or minus. Is that right? That was your understanding of the department's approach?
Yes, and the way in which I think I described it just now, in terms of the way they got an allocation and then as it were, siphoned it out.
Given that the Macfarlane Trust's expressed charitable purpose was to meet or attempt to meet the needs of its beneficiaries, do you think that the department's approach, funding not based upon assessment of need, was effectively setting the Macfarlane Trust up to fail, or at least to struggle?
No, I think it was just it was just custom and practice for the way they dealt with their allocation arrangements.
Do you think the department should have allocated funds by reference to the needs and characteristics of the beneficiary group, given the history and the very reason why these funds were being provided in the first place?
Well, I think it would have been difficult for them to do that. How do you? I can say a lot. If I'll try to keep it simple. How do you define the needs of one beneficiary against another? And we had about 370 something primary beneficiaries, and more than that, widows and others. To go through in almost person by person in that way would be immensely difficult to do, and actually would be, even if they had the time and inclination, quite a hazardous thing to do, because it would not be long before individual trustees wanted to challenge how not trustees, beneficiaries, how they were going to be regarded. So I don't think that that would have worked.
Forgive me, my question.
Some other things I want to say on funding, which I'll see how your questions go.
My question was not about assessing the needs of every individual as an individual. I should have made that clearer. My question was, rather than just saying, here's a pot, we're going to take off X% and this is what you've got, do you think funding should have been on the basis of at least some attempt by the department to understand and assess the needs and characteristics of the cohort, not on a one-by-one basis, but the cohort, who were, after all, a defined cohort of infected and bereaved and carers and dependents?
Well, certainly I tried, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, I'm not suggesting that for a second, tried very hard to get the department to understand that. And for instance, when the Macfarlane Trust was set up do stop me if I'm going down the wrong route for you. When the Macfarlane Trust was set up in 1988, it had its beneficiary community, which sadly primary is reduced, had I think the eldest was about 42 and about the youngest was aged about 6. So if you then fast forward that to 2012, the community was a very different one, much more mature one in age and less in primary beneficiaries than was the situation when the Macfarlane Trust was set up. And furthermore, there were a large number of widows, infected widows, and children who were now looking for the Macfarlane Trust to give them support. I don't think the Department of Health ever really got to a grip with that one. I mean, I think that was part of the problem. There may have been, I don't think they were trying to do anything to, I can't remember the word you used, Ms. Richardson. They weren't trying to destroy us or anything like that, but I think they were fearful of what they might get into if they got too close to what they were doing. And I think they were much more interested in giving us some money and letting us take the whatever followed after that.
You've expressed in your statement I think a very firm view that the establishment of the Macfarlane Trust was not the way in which the government should have been administering funds to support the infected and affected. The government should, you say, have been administering funds directly and not through arm's length bodies such as the Macfarlane Trust. And you say it felt as though the Macfarlane Trust operated as a punching bag or cushion between beneficiaries and the department. Was that your view at the time you were a trustee and chair?
It was my view when I was a trustee and chair, and maybe I was somewhat outspoken in one context, and that is that the impression I got was that when the Macfarlane Trust was set up in 1988, it was a way of the government of the day, not having to have direct contact with the beneficiary community, which clearly was where we were. We were, in a sense, the first line. We were the line between the government and the beneficiary community, and a lot of the emotions which arose over the years were because of the feelings of the community towards how they've been dealt with, and also how badly they were being funded, supported.
Do you recall whether you ever expressed to the Department of Health the view that the government should be providing funding directly rather than expecting another body to do so?
I think I expressed that view to Elsa White, but it was in an informal way. I never wrote any papers or anything like that about it. I think do stop me if I'm going in the wrong direction, but I think that as well as what I've just said, sort of going back, two things I would like to say which might be helpful. Going back to what answers your question just now, and I was explaining about the age, maturity and so forth. The other thing which was difficult, which was never really addressed, and I don't think it could have been, very difficult, is that happily HIV has no longer is a morbidity or mortality issue, and that it was thought it would be in 1988. That's my understanding, and a lot as these poor men aged, many of their problems were ones which arose from haemophilia, not because of HIV. Now, we quite deliberately did not try and differentiate between the two. So to some extent, and I think it was absolutely the right thing to do, we were giving people support for for wider medical problems.
You've also said in your statement and referred already in the course of your evidence today to the way in which you negotiated with the Department of Health. You say you adopted, this is your statement, a very tough attitude, and there were meetings which were not comfortable for the Department of Health. Is there anything further you can tell us either about the ways in which you were tough with the department, or the ways in which you sensed the meetings were not comfortable for the department?
Well, information was given to them as far as we could, which showed impacts of funding decisions. But my approach, and I think it's fair to say with Jan Barlow, was very challenging with them. I mean, sorry, I'm not sure what I meant to say this, but I do have a very challenging way of going about things, and I would put them on the spot and make them understand what the wider repercussions would be for the beneficiary, for us, with the beneficiary community, if they were not if they were more generous towards us. I mean, sorry, I didn't put that very well, but and I mean, I do know there were occasions when there were some shouting matches, and either in person or down the phone, and so yeah, it was not it was not a nice cup of tea and biscuit type discussion with them at all. But on the other hand, it was important to make sure we kept a working relationship together.
Did you ever consider inviting beneficiaries to meetings, or trying to organise meetings with the department, or trying to organise meetings with civil servants and beneficiaries in attendance?
Well, I invited one of the other trustees to one of the meetings, and it didn't go very well, so I didn't go after that. But as far as the beneficiaries are concerned, I don't know whether we ever suggested that. I can't remember, but I would be very surprised if the department were prepared to agree to that.
So we've had some evidence, at least, of a meeting in, I think it was around 2006, in which Mr. Stevens attended a meeting with a minister and civil servants, and there were a number of beneficiary representatives. But that's not something you can recall happening during your tenure.
I'm sure we didn't do it.
Did there ever come a point in time in which you thought that your approach of, as it were, negotiating from the inside, not confronting publicly, not taking up a more campaigning approach, when it became apparent to you that wasn't working, and you thought it might be time to try a different tack?
Well, I think to some extent it did work, as I was saying earlier with the austerity situation, and I mean, I think it was before I was a chair, but I like to think I had quite an involvement in it. My view had always been that most additional funds ought to go into increasing regular payments for beneficiaries so that they can make their own lifestyle decisions. And I was expressing that view, which I think you might find in minutes prior to the Archer inquiry. And one thing which came out of the Archer inquiry was additional funding, which but increase in the regular payments. So I think it did. It did work in that sense. I wasn't against campaigning per se, but I did not see that it would be very helpful if it were the McFarlane Trust doing it. And I thought that if there were I think I described this morning, if there was some campaigning taking place under the auspices of the Haemophilia Society, if MPs were lobbying ministers and so forth more than they were, and we were having challenging exchanges with the Department of Health. That was probably the most effective approach of the three. The problem was, instead of that happening, the various bodies were arguing or not getting on particularly well together.
Now, I think I asked you this morning about the extent to which the department engaged with the business case. I just want you to look at one letter with me from the department, and then I'll ask you a further question. MACF 5062_001, please, Shomik. You'll see, Mr. Evans, it's a letter addressed to you 19th of February 2014, and it's in relation to the business case that was submitted by the Macfarlane Trust to the department for the year 2014-15. You'll see from the second paragraph it says ministers have decided this is not the right time for an uplift in allocation, and then reference is made to issues, some of which have been highlighted during a Westminster Hall debate. This is Dr. White, goes on then to say that she's not yet able to confirm what the actual 2014-15 allocation will be, and then recognise the decision not to increase funding will be disappointing news for the Trust, that your board will have to make some difficult decisions. I hope it doesn't come as a surprise to you, given our discussion on a number of occasions of the continuing downward pressure on government spending and the need to carefully manage your beneficiaries' expectations. And then she says she'd be happy to meet with you. This obviously doesn't engage with the actual business case at all. Was this, as far as you can recall, fairly typical of the department's response to requests for increased funding?
Yes, but may I just elaborate on the letter, which might be helpful to the inquiry? We were asked to put in a business case by the department when we were pressurising them in the ways I've described for additional funding to go to the minister. And this is during the austerity period. And we submitted one, the deadline was something like the 25th of October, thereabouts, the previous year, 2013. We got it in, and then there was a great deal of procrastination at the department before we got any response to it, and ministers were still looking at it, we were told, and so on. So the tempers were quite frayed, and you will find in the email, in the evidence, some emails from Jan and or myself, which made it pretty clear that how unhappy we were with all this. So there was a lot with this particular one. Sorry, but being more specific with your question, this was not unusual. It was quite a common way of almost saying in a pleasant way, sorry, there's no money, basically. Can I say something else, Ms. Richards, which, in case you're going to go there a bit later, is that the funding issue was one which went back a long way, as you probably gathered from previous interviews. I think that the economy in the country exacerbated that problem around about 2012 or so. But the other new pressure for the Macfarlane Trust was the establishment of the Caxton Foundation, because there was a lot of feeling, and much of it misplaced, that, I think it was misplaced, that funds were going to set up the Caxton Foundation and support the beneficiaries of hepatitis C, which otherwise might have come to Macfarlane beneficiaries. And the department tried to be adamant that it was new funds, but I mean, that took some believing in a way. And all the time, some of the Macfarlane Trust beneficiaries were as it were, looking across the road, I don't mean that deliberately, to see whether the hepatitis C Caxton Foundation beneficiaries were doing better than they would. So that was another strand to the problem.
We can take the letter down, thank you. I'm going to ask you now about the situation in relation to the Macfarlane Trust's reserves. And I'm going to pick the picture up in 2012 because the inquiry's already heard evidence about the position prior to that, not least from Mr. Fitzgerald. So if we pick it up in 2012, you were asked to join the Reserves Working Party in about February 2012, I think. And then if we just look at a paper from July 2012, Showmakits, MACF 5025_092. I don't want to ask you any detailed questions about this, but it's just to put what we look at next into context. This is a paper from Martin Harvey, 4th of July 2012, the paring down of the reserves, progress in respect of the Department of Health and their preferred timetable for future disbursements. And we can see, referred to in paragraph 1.1, reference to the Department of Health's requirement that the Macfarlane Trust develops a business case for paring down the reserves by the 30th of December 2012. And then there are a number of matters of background set out. If we just go further down the page to the heading, the current situation, we can see there it's said that the Department of Health, and Mr. Harvest put this in quotation marks, asked MFT through the then Chairman and Chief Executive to take steps to reduce the level of reserves very significantly. They intimated that if the Trust was not able to do so, the DH will most probably reduce the level of our annual allocation over the next few years and expect the board to supplement the level from the reserves. And then we see the reference to the Reserves Working Party and to you joining it in February 2012. And then if we just look at the bottom of the page, we can see it says, the DH Infectious Diseases and Blood Policy Team Deputy Director made it clear in January 2012 that the Department of Health would need to approve the business case before the MFT could commit funds from the reserves. It's worth noting that the mood music from the Department of Health surrounding the business case has over time significantly hardened. And then it goes on to talk about the different options for utilising reserves. Now, I'll come back to that, but is that, broadly speaking, a correct summary of the position as at spring-summer 2012? When
yes, I think so. But would you just permit me, in very briefly, to cast back
yes.
to 2007? Because if one were to trace through the minutes from virtually the time I became a trustee, I was very outspoken from the beginning about having this high level of reserves, because I made the point at the number of meetings that it was not right not to be meeting the needs of the beneficiary community, because and we were sitting on reserves of 5 or 6 million and looking at the investments at the board meetings, and we should have been allocating that money. And I think I'm sure I predicted that sooner or later the Department of Health would be looking to take advantage of that in terms of our regular income. So I was very much on song, and probably one of the pushes, I was probably the prime one, to actually carry out this review, and therefore for it to lead to the business case. Christopher Fitzgerald agreed to carry out agreed with the NSSC that they would carry out this review work, and which led to hiring equal MC, and I don't think it was going terribly well. So then I was asked to if I joined the working party.
Having said I was
quite keen for you to know my view on the reserves going back a long way.
Well, arising out of that, Mr. Evans, and having said I wasn't going to ask you about the pre-2012 position, let me do.
Yeah, sorry.
Let me do exactly what I said I wasn't going to do. We've obviously heard from Mr. Fitzgerald on this issue, but what's your understanding or recollection of why the reserves were not substantially reduced between 2007 and 2012?
There just seem, well, my recollection, it's a long time ago, so was to some extent one of apathy. There seemed to be other things which most other members of the board seemed preoccupied with.
If we then pick up the picture with a paper from you and Mr. Harvey in July of 2012, MACF 5060_038. You'll see it's a document headed Proposal to Spend the Retained Reserves. And if we go, I'm not going to go through all of it. We just go to page 5, please, Shomik. If we look down the bottom of the page, you have that heading addressing the pre-Archer deficit, and there's reference at 3.1 to the need to conduct a detailed review of individual capital needs, and then reference is made to the trustees having engaged a specialist firm to contact, sometimes visit every living infected beneficiary and bereaved family to ascertain the appropriate level of capital relief required. Then you say initial inquiries suggest that a detailed review along the lines proposed will not cost more than £100,000, which will be fully funded by the trust. It is estimated that the surplus level of reserves will be fully utilised by the end of 2013-14. And we see that this is a document authored by you and Mr. Harvey. Without going through the document paragraph by paragraph, can you just tell us in a nutshell what it was you and Mr. Harvey were proposing and why?
Well, the proposal came from the Working Party, about which we've just been talking. But we were, in running down the reserves, we were keen, as was the Working Party, that the money went to be used in the ways which were most beneficial to the community, and not just in allocating everybody, say, a few £1,000s or whatever, but actually to target what their particular needs were. So the purpose of the survey, which was carried out by Equal MC after a competitive tendering exercise, was to find out from individual beneficiaries what they saw as their particular needs, and we then, as far as we could, responded to them. If you want to know what they were, I'm very happy to tell you.
I think we can probably glean that sufficiently from the documents, Mr. Evans, but thank you. Just a couple of further short documents to look at before we then go to some email exchanges that you had with the department. First of all, MACF 5074_004. You'll see this was a letter written 12th of April 2012, so it's to Mr. Harvey, but it's I think around the time that you're taking over as chair. And there's a particular issue about a letter sent to beneficiaries that, unless you want to comment on, I'm proposing to ask Mr. Mishcon about rather than spend time with you on it. But if we look at the 5th paragraph, just wants to sorry, can we go up again? Yeah, it's the bottom paragraph as now on screen, Mr. Evans. The beneficiary who's writing this letter says this: The fact that the reserves have been allowed to accumulate over the years is an egregious breach of duty, especially when so many of us have made genuine requests for financial help. In light of what you said earlier about what your stance has been since 2007, Mr. Evans, is that an observation with which you have some sympathy or level of agreement?
I have a great deal of sympathy for it, yes.
And then if we move to May 2012, I just want to ask you about a letter from the department. It's MACF 5025_093. So we can see again it's addressed to Mr. Harvey. It's a letter 18th of May 2012. It's from Rowena Geacock at the Department of Health. It refers to a meeting that had taken place between, I think, Mr. Harvey, you, and the Department of Health in January of 2012. Refers to the Trust working up a more detailed proposal for drawing down the reserve over a period of several years, which we would be put to ministers later in the year. That's the first paragraph. We go to the third paragraph. You'll see it refers to then a recent meeting, 4th of May, in which Mr. Harvey had indicated that some trustees were keen to begin funding a programme of capital payments from the reserve. And then it says this, whilst we appreciate their wish to press ahead, it's not what we agreed with you and Roger when we met in January. I would therefore be grateful if you would abide by that agreement not to begin any new programme of capital payments from the reserve. We would like to understand how the Trust's proposals for spending down the reserve now over the page stand, and we'll arrange a meeting to discuss this with you and Roger as soon as practicable. We just go back to the previous page. Is it right to understand this letter as the department telling the McFarlane Trust not to proceed with the trustees' wish to start funding capital payments, but to wait until effectively that's been approved by the Department of Health?
It would appear so. Yes, I can't remember what we agreed in January. I think it's worth just, may be helpful to you to just add one thing on funding, is that although a financial allocation was agreed every year, and we had these reserves sitting in invested, but in order to spend money, we had to call on the actual monies from the Department of Health. So we might have approval of an allocation of something, but they wouldn't actually give us the money, and it wouldn't all go into our bank account. So in order to run down the reserves, for instance, and I think we spent over £1 million, we would have had to be calling to get that actual money from the department in order to do it. So they had a grip on us in that respect. Not one which I enjoyed, but they did.
If we then,
does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Again, that may be an issue I want to come back to you on later. But if we just carry on chronologically looking at the reserves issue, the next document is MACF 5060_047, please. It's a series of emails. If we can go to the last page, please, Shomik. So we can see here, it's an email from you, 26th of July 2012, to the Department of Health, attaching what's described as the interim business case for the spending of reserves, and then saying there's a proposal to agree a final business case at the board meeting in September. If we go to the next page, back, please, Shomik. Previous page, I should have said. We then see the bottom half of the page, the response from Ben Cole at the Department of Health, asserting stating in the first paragraph, unfortunately, we think it needs strengthening even further in order to present to ministers. And he says he's taken the liberty of making some changes and inserting some questions into the attached version. Then he says there's two fundamental issues regarding the reserves paper, needs more detail on the level of need, refers to about 15 people having been interviewed so far. And then bottom of the page, assessment of charitable need. There's no statement in the proposal of how MFT proposes to judge charitable need. Can you confirm whether MFT intends to assess an applicant's charitable need in judging whether they should receive money from the reserve? And if so, how it will be judged? And then there's some assertions which I think I'm right in understanding from subsequent correspondence were incorrect about household income. But leave that aside. This appears to be the department not just wanting to consider your business case or have sight of it, but actually putting changes into it, proposing changes, and saying we want more information about this, that and the other, how the trust's going to go about matters. First of all, was that your understanding of the letter, of the email?
Yes, and I remember this vividly, and I remember getting very, very annoyed with Mr. Kohler down the phone. I thought it was quite wrong in the department to do this.
If we then go 2 pages back, please, Shamik. I think the next chronological email we have in this chain, bottom half of the page, is you to Ailsa White at the Department of Health, 25th of August. And you asked for an update on progress in reaching a decision on the commitment by the MFT of its reserves. It appears from the second paragraph that the further information requested by Mr. Cole has been provided. You say you've already asked for confirmation our case has been submitted to the Minister in the amended form we sent it to DH and have not yet received a reply. Can you assist us with this? Do you know how detailed or what the nature was of the amendments proposed by Mr. Cole?
Is this different from the amendments we've just been looking at?
No. It's well. What's happened is Mr. Cole's made some amendments and asked for some further information. This tells us you've sent some further information and submitted an amended case. But what we can't tell from this is what the Department of Health proposed amendments actually were. Do you have any recollection of that?
Well, I don't know, but surmising, I would think we would have complied with the 2 points which he made in his earlier email, one of which I think was extraordinary, about having another 15 beneficiaries. But I do not know. I mean, whether I should speculate, I don't know. But it would have been something like that anyway.
And then if we go to the page prior to this, we can see Ms. White responds on the 30th of August to you, says this is a significant issue, we've been giving it careful thought. After further consideration with DH Finance, we've decided not to put the issue to ministers until the Trust has agreed its final business case in October. We believe that ministers are extremely unlikely to support the current draft proposal because it does not make the case that there is £4 million worth of charitable need among the beneficiaries. As you know, the MFT was set up to meet the charitable needs of its beneficiaries. You, therefore, need to convince ministers that the beneficiaries have current charitable needs in respect of the items identified in the proposal and explain why these have not been met from the reserve in previous years. So in order to give the final business case the best chance of receiving ministerial support in whole or part, we strongly advise that it contains the following information, and then we've got 3 bullet points: why the reserve has not been used to date for charitable purposes and what has changed to merit its distribution now, an analysis of the data that's been obtained from the survey of beneficiaries that MFT has commissioned. This should include an assessment of each beneficiary's current ability to pay for any items they are identified as needing, in suitably anonymised form, of course. Third bullet point, a statement on what standard of charitable need the Trust intends to apply to applications for grants from the reserve and how the Trust plans to make an assessment of need. And then there's a repetition of the suggestion that MFT data shows that the average infected beneficiary has a net income between £31,000 and £39,000. What business was it of the departments as to how the trustees of the Macfarlane Trust expended their reserves?
Well, it shouldn't have been, and I'll elaborate on that in a second. But if I can cast you back to something which I said this morning, the second paragraph starts off after first consideration with DH Finance. So I strongly suspect that all these points came up from the Finance Directorate in the DH, who would not have understood what we were all about, rather than from Elsa White and Rowena Geacock and their colleagues. The answer is no. I don't. In my opinion, it was nothing to do with them at all. When documents like business cases, in my experience, which I was explaining to Sir Brian just before lunch, go round the Department of Health, all sorts of people ask for certain things. And I suspect this has happened. There's no idea whether the ministers would have wanted it. But because we needed to call on funds from, because the cash flowed from the department in the way I was describing to you a few minutes ago, it's very difficult not to play ball with that game. But I agree, and this was another matter which, where, shall we say, temperatures were heated.
And we'll look at an email you sent in response. If we go back to the page before this, please, Seamus. You emailed Ailsa White on the 5th of September 2012. You say, we will submit a business case by the 31st of October. So I think that's the final business case. What you'd sent was an interim one. You say that the change of tack by DH causes us problems. You express disappointment. I'm sorry, we're not looking at the same document. Sorry, Seamus, could we go to the page before this? Page number, fourth page electronically of this collection of material, it should be. There. Right, I'll start again, and now that we've got the correct document on screen, my apologies. So bottom half of the page, sorry, Seamus, my fault. 5th of September 2012, so this is your response. You say that you'll submit the business case. You say the change of tack by DH causes us problems. Next paragraph, you express disappointment. My board is also disappointed. You do not feel able to progress on the basis of the briefing note. And then is the briefing note the same as the interim business case?
I can't remember.
Okay. And then you express dismay in the next paragraph over DH using...
No, sorry, go on, sorry.
Dismay over beneficiaries using average net income as the criterion for initial assessment of our case. We did not include any information in the briefing note on income, which should, in our opinion, have been the only source for your consideration. As you may know, I've discussed this with Ben Coles over the phone. He says it's based on a guesstimate made by Martin during a recent meeting. Martin does not recall proffering these figures, but even if he did, we would have expected you to confirm them with MFT before they're figuring in your internal discussions. We believe the figures which cover a wide income band are exaggerated. The next paragraph, more importantly, average income is not an appropriate figure for assessing need. There are many beneficiaries and widows with incomes much less than the average, some as low as £6,000 per annum. It is these we'll be looking to address primarily, not Mr. and Mrs. Average. A comparison with national average income levels is also misleading and inequitable, as it takes no account of the financial commitments falling on the co-infected arising from their clinical conditions. It also disregards their inability to borrow money for such issues as home improvements, which we are looking to fund. MFT income, for instance, is disregarded by financial institutions when assessing creditworthiness. And if we go to the next page, top of the next page, irrespective of the figures, using income as a criterion also takes DH down a controversial path. As you know, going back to the 1980s and the inception of MFT, the whole ethos of providing an income to the co-infected was not based on means testing, which you now appear to be considering. And then you say all this will be considered in the business case. You don't say in this response that the Department of Health is not entitled to the categories of information that were sought in Ms. White's email. If we go further down this same page, we can just see what those are again. So you're certainly expressing dismay and picking up on the income position. but you don't say that it's none of the Department of Health's business and you're not willing to provide the 3 bullet points sought. Was there any reason for that? As far as you can recall?
If I can make 2 observations, I mean, there's a reference just earlier on to my telephone conversation with Ben Cole, which I'm pretty sure is the one I was alluding to. I didn't know you were going to come to this 2 or 3 minutes ago, where we had quite a shouting match down the phone, to put it bluntly. And secondly, during that call and possibly talking to his colleagues in the department, it was made very clear it wasn't their business. Now, it wasn't my style, or isn't my style, to put immoderate words into a letter and email. So it was said, but I didn't put it in those terms in that letter, because I didn't think that would be fruitful in terms of our getting a good outcome from it. So I think that, incidentally, that's a good illustration of where it might appear on the surface to some that we were being friendly and easygoing with the department, when in fact we weren't. I think you can read quite a lot between the lines in some of that email which I sent.
Okay, and then just to complete this email chain, if we go to page 2 of the document, please, Shomik, we can see Ms. White responding on the 7th of September, so bottom of half of the page. If I pick it up in the second paragraph of her email, which is in bold print, we've sought to work from the outset of this process at the start of the year. We have sought to work with the Trust to help develop the proposals for paying down the reserve and secure ministerial support for the proposal. It was in that spirit that we decided not to present the Trust's current draft proposal to ministers, as we felt that ministers were unlikely to support it in its current form. And then there's reference to giving further time to develop the proposal. Next paragraph was, we have a responsibility to the Trust to help it present its proposal to ministers. We also have a duty to provide ministers with comprehensive and impartial advice. Therefore, we are required to subject the proposal to an appropriate level of scrutiny and provide ministers with all of the relevant information they might require to make a decision on the future of the reserve. In the current fiscal climate, we expect ministers to look very closely at this issue. Now, that appears to suggest that the department's position was that ultimately it was for ministers to make a decision on the future of the reserve. Was that the Trust's view?
No. I think what had happened evolved over a period of time was any business cases such as this, which we put to the department, was dealt with in exactly the same way as ones which might come from, say, within the NHS, which it shouldn't have been, and that was not the way of doing it. Once it gets into that mill, it's extremely difficult to stop it and say, we won't do this, can you please release the money for us, because they're going to say no. So to some extent we had to go along with their requirements, but there was a lot of anger and feelings about all this, as I've said at least twice in the last few minutes.
And if we go to the next page, so page 3 electronically, Shomik, Ms. White's email continues, and if we just look at the third paragraph, which is what I want to ask you about, the objects of the Trust are quite clear in stating that its purpose is to meet the charitable need of its beneficiaries. Because of this, we and ministers need to understand what standard of charitable need the Trust is applying and what the level of charitable need among the beneficiary community actually is when considering funding issues affecting the Trust. The income of the beneficiaries is clearly central to that issue, albeit not necessarily the only relevant factor. We recognise that the income of the beneficiaries varies, as indeed does need. Do you recall whether you understood or read this to be casting some doubt on whether there was a genuine need for this kind of assistance amongst the beneficiary community?
Can't remember, but reflecting now, it seems a typical way of processing any business case for money. Can I add, if you don't mind, which might be, if it's helpful to you, 2 or 3 things. One is this. This frustration over the business case and the various emails was the time at which I tried very hard to get a meeting with Anna Soubry, because she was a relevant minister, and I couldn't do it through the department, so I did it through someone who was a political associate of hers, not an MP. And as I said earlier, I got snubbed at the last minute. That was partly because of this reaction, and I think probably let me call it the Mishcon letter, if you don't mind me using shorthand, was drafted. I think it was around about this time. The other thing is, I think this is a classic example of where MPs, with possibly some help from the Haemophilia Society, but I wouldn't push that one too hard, are the ones who ought to get to the minister, because there is no way through conventional means, I would have been able to make the points about this directly to a minister, because the civil servants would have made sure I didn't have the opportunity to do it. And this is why I thought I'd broken through that by getting a meeting with Anna Soubry in another way. I suspect she asked for a briefing, and then the door was closed on me.
Can we next look at MACF 5060_065? So this isn't the business case I think I sent to the department. No, in fact, I think it is. Sorry, it is. It's a paper authored, I think, by you or by the working party. Perhaps, are you able to assist with who authored it?
Can I see the next page?
Yes. Sorry, it is. It is the business case. I think probably in final form. If we look at the top of the next page, very top of the page. Business case from the McFarlane Trust to commit reserve funding and reduce its reserves to £500,000. So would this have been authored by the Reserves Working Party and approved by the board?
Yeah, well, why if I'm looking pensive, either this paper was prepared directly by the Reserves Working Party, which I would have had some involvement, which it probably is actually, but it would have been on the back of the report which we got from Equal MC. And
the date of it is not...
I would have had a role in this paper, but I cannot remember any more than that.
It's dated the 9th of November 2012, and if we look at the executive summary, we can see it refers to the current reserves of approximately £4 million, and in the last sentence of the paragraph, that the MFT does not need to hold a level of reserve of £4 million as contingency for meeting regular income needs. This business case therefore proposes that the reserve level be reduced to £500,000 and that remaining reserves be deployed to meet the serious financial needs, in particular for capital expenditure facing primary and secondary beneficiaries and which have become apparent over the years. The MFT has never had recurring funds from the department at the level necessary to address these needs. And then reference is made to, if the funds are not now committed, DH and the MFT will be storing up serious problems for the future. I'm not going to go through the detail of the paper. If we just go to page 50, so I think it's probably electronic 16, Shomik. We see there the heading, what criteria will the MFT use to decide on the distribution of the reserves? Is that the standard that was going to be taken to assessing charitable need, to put it in the terms of Ailsa White's request?
I think that the reserves were used to deal with one-off needs which beneficiaries had, and the predominant one was housing improvements, and I think that the basis on which the criteria, I don't know what's further down, the criteria was really that sort of need, not about people's financial position.
Well, I'll come to that in a
Does
moment.
that answer your question? Yeah.
It probably does. I think it might become clear if we look at the bottom of the page. But before we do that, can I just draw your attention to paragraph 7.2? It says the detailed criteria will depend on the level of reserves the DH sanctions MFT to allocate. So it would appear that the McFarlane Trust was proceeding on the basis that it required the Department of Health's permission or approval. Is that a fair reading of this?
Well, we had no alternative for the reasons we've been talking about, because unless they sanctioned our spending reserves in this way, they wouldn't have given us the cash to put it in the vernacular to be able to pay the bills of the beneficiaries who had work done on their properties.
And then if we look towards the bottom,
I put it colloquially, but that was it basically.
If we look towards the bottom of the page, we can see what there was meant by the criteria. It says the board's not in a position to finalise criteria until the sum is known. The board would be open to agree these criteria with the Department of Health after then. Did you think it was necessary to have the department's agreement to the criteria, or was that just attempting to, as it were, be cooperative and give the department what it had sought?
No, we had to do it. I mean, it goes back to the document about the business case and the ministers having to agree.
And then we can see that suggested.
I can see no reason why that should be necessary, but I think it's an example of central government being very central.
And then we can see the priority criteria there being identified: income level, whether the home adaptations are necessary, home adaptations necessary to ensure the beneficiary can continue to live in the community and their properties are in a reasonable state, needs to support aids to daily living, carer support, and then top of the next page refers to education and training needs. If we just go to the next page and see the concluding statement, top of the page, what will be the consequences of not spending the reserves? If the MFTDH and the government do not now take the opportunity to commit nearly all of the reserves funds to meet the needs described above, they will be storing up problems for the future. Is it fair to read this business case as representing your view, the board's view, that it really was very important in the interests of beneficiaries for the reserves to be expended in the way described in this document?
Yes, and I think paragraph 8.1 expands on that somewhat, and was also something I was talking about half an hour or so ago.
So I note the time. I've still got a few further questions on reserves, so it might be that this is a convenient point at which to take a break.
Well, we'll take a break now then, shall we? And come back at 3:45. 3:45, if you please.